On my arrival in Madrid, I alighted at the palace of the Prince of the Peace, where the Grand Duke of Berg resided. Chapter 19. The Grand Duke of Berg had managed the Emperor's affairs a little too much in his own way, and I perceived from his conversation that he wished to make the Spanish business subservient to his own interests. The mind of the Grand Duke was none of the most enlarged, and the first misfortunes which we sustained in Spain were in a great measure attributed to his levity and absurd hopes. I learned from him that he had for several years maintained a correspondence with the Prince of the Peace. It would be difficult to assign a reason for this, and I can only account for it in the following manner. They both stood on the same elevation of rank in the two countries. Both were equally ambitious, and their fortunes were alike. These circumstances gave rise to friendship between them, but on the part of Murat, it was a matter of calculation, as the sequel of these memoirs will show, and on the part of the Prince of the Peace, it was finesse. For his ambition was not of the same kind as that of the Grand Duke of Berg, but as he was at that time the only really powerful man in Spain, either for intrigue or resolution, he thought that this correspondence, besides being attended with no inconvenience to him, might one day turn to his advantage if the Grand Duke of Berg succeeded in the execution of the project he attributed to him. On the reception of the letter which he had transmitted to the Emperor, Murat had put his troops in motion and had sent Adjutant General Montieu to receive the orders of Charles IV, but he had not set out before he received the following letter, which was addressed to him personally by the dethroned king. It was written in Italian. Sir, my dear brother, I have informed your adjutant of all that has happened. I beg you will do me the service to communicate to the Emperor my prayer, that he will deliver the Prince of the Peace, who suffers only because he is the friend of France. It is our wish to go with him to the country that may be best suited to our health. For the present, we are going to Badajoz. I hope that before our departure you will send us an answer if you cannot possibly see us, for I have no confidence in anyone but you and the Emperor. In the meanwhile, I am your very affectionate brother and friend, with all my heart, Charles IV. To this letter was added a note, no less urgent, written in the Queen's hand. It paints the anxiety of dethroned monarchs and affords an idea of the violence which brought about the abdication. It is written in the following terms: the king, my husband, who desires me to write because he cannot do so on account of the pain and swelling of his right hand, wishes to know whether the Grand Duke of Berg will undertake to employ all his influence with the Emperor to save the life of the Prince of the Peace and to procure for him the attendance of some servants and chaplains, and whether the Grand Duke can go to see him, or at least console him, for he being his great friend, he places all his hopes in him and the Emperor, to whom he has always been attached. Will the Grand Duke obtain from the Emperor something to enable the king, my husband, myself, and the Prince of the Peace to live together in some place good for our health, where we might be free from control and beyond the reach of intrigues, in which certainly we should take no share? The Emperor is generous, he is a hero, and he has always supported his faithful allies and those who are oppressed. Nobody is more so than we three. And why? Because we have always been the Emperor's faithful allies. For my son, we have nothing to hope but misery and persecution. Our enemies invent falsehoods for the purpose of criminating in the eyes of the public and the Emperor, that innocent and devoted friend of the French, of the Grand Duke, and of the Emperor, the Prince of the Peace. Let them not be credited. They have the power and the means of giving to falsehood the semblance of truth. Both the king and I wish to see and speak to the Grand Duke. May he afford us the protection he has in his power. We are thankful for the troops he sent us, and for all the marks of attention he has shown us. He may be fully convinced of the friendly sentiments we cherish and have always cherished for him. We are in his power and that of the Emperor, and we are persuaded that he will grant what we ask, which is all that we desire, being in the hands of so great and powerful a monarch and hero. The queen was not content with seeking the protection of the Grand Duke in the name of her husband, but she also wrote to solicit it in her own name. The Queen of Etruria joined her entreaties to those of her mother. The whole correspondence bears the stamp of consternation and dejection. The violence must have been great, and the threat long impending to have reduced all this family to such a state of alarm that they thought only of imploring an asylum in which their lives might be secure and their physical wants provided for. To the Grand Duke Charles IV was, of course, King of Spain until his government acknowledged Ferdinand to be chief of the Spanish nation. He naturally yielded to the entreaties of the dethroned king and those of the queen, which were still more urgent, and he took the Prince of the Peace under the protection of his banners. He did more. He sent a guard of honor to Charles IV and openly declared that until he should receive more ample information, he would acknowledge no other sovereign in Spain. From this moment, the party of the Prince of the Asturias, that is to say the nation, and the Grand Duke of Berg began to watch and consequently to distrust each other. I was very much dissatisfied with what I perceived to be the result of the conduct of the two conflicting parties, neither of which appreciated the situation of the General-in-Chief. It was natural to suppose that an opinion would be formed of the nature of his instructions from the conduct he observed. He besides took the liberty of doing a number of things which his instructions did not direct. The Spaniards did not know what to conjecture, and I was not better able to come to any conclusion on the subject. Everything I saw was inconsistent with what the emperor had explained to me. However, I did not remain long in uncertainty. When the Grand Duke of Berg began to talk of our ambassador, Monsieur de Beauharnais, he said things which were most unreasonable and marked by passion. I had then no longer any doubt of the reality of the plans which I at first only suspected, and I hastened to counteract them. I called on our ambassador, who was much esteemed at Madrid, where he performed his duty properly. But he did not intrigue. I found with him a tall Spanish priest whom he presented to me and whom I afterwards discovered to be Canon Escoquis, the confessor of the Prince of the Asturias. He had come to confer with the French ambassador on the difficulties which surrounded King Ferdinand, and to express a desire to do whatever might satisfy the emperor. Monsieur de Beauharnais was embarrassed, and he had not been accredited to the new king. He had received no instructions since the Aranjuez Revolution, and my arrival was some relief to him, more especially as he had not been well treated by the Grand Duke of Berg. The confessor, Escoquis, too, knowing that I had just come from Paris, was eager to confer with me in order to be able afterwards to report the conversation to Ferdinand. In fine, we had a long interview. At this time, I knew nothing of Spain beyond its history and its geography. I had not the slightest idea of the intrigues which had for a long series of years distracted that unhappy country. The cabinet of Madrid had been accustomed to negotiate with handfuls of money, and it seemed to be thought that I was only come to make my price. The Canon Escoquis inspired me with respect on account of the attachment which he manifested for his prince. He shed tears at the idea of any misfortune befalling him. Confidence was established between us as far as could be expected at a first meeting. I began by expressing my astonishment at so sudden a change having taken place in Spain with respect to us, and a change for which there was no motive. The canon resisted this imputation and declared that the king had nothing so much as heart as to continue in good understanding with France. I told him that I could not avoid remarking that hitherto appearances had not corresponded with the good intentions of which he gave me assurance, because what must strike an impartial observer was the attitude of the Spanish government and of our army towards each other, which could not fail to occasion some irritation, and that there was at least a want of address in placing things in this situation at a time when Spain had need of the friendship of France in a revolution which she was just commencing, and which might turn out to be the counterpart of ours, especially as to disturb its course. Nothing more was necessary than to countenance the recall of the king. To carry this opposition into effect, I remarked, was an easy matter, since a great part of Spain, though well pleased at being rid of the Prince of the Peace, was nevertheless strongly attached to Charles IV, and the great body of the nation did not approve the violent manner in which he had been deprived of the crown. As to the emperor, I said that this event was the more disagreeable to him, as he was not prepared for it. I added that couriers, it was true, had been sent to the emperor, but that he would receive none until he knew whether Charles IV was satisfied, because it was with him he had engagements, and that it was fit he should see matters adjusted with regard to the father before he entered into any engagements with the son. It will not be with his wish if he obliged to interfere in a family question, but he will not permit it to be settled in a way prejudicial to him. It is the duty of those Spaniards who have access to the king to guard him against adopting a line of conduct which could only be the result of the bad conduct of some favorites. For we would not wait to take offense until we saw the Spanish armies on the Bidassoa. The worthy canon listened to me very attentively and declared, as he said, from the bottom of his heart, that he was very sorry the emperor had not sent another marshal to command the army in Spain, but that he could not disguise from me that the Grand Duke of Berg did not conduct himself with propriety towards the king. He was, of course, aware that as yet no recognition of the new government had taken place, but he entered into details of other grievances on the part of the Grand Duke, such as his insisting on the Prince of the Peace being set at liberty, and his circulating the report that the emperor would not recognize the Prince of the Asturias as king. This spread alarm through the country and dampened the enthusiasm of the people in favor of the change. He concluded by requesting that I would permit him to report what had passed between us to the king, and that I would give him my own address. The conversation which I had with our ambassador after the canon's departure confirmed the opinion I had before formed of the Aranjuez Revolution was the result of a conspiracy of long standing, which had been acted upon at a moment which appeared favorable for the execution of the plans of the party hostile to the Prince of the Peace. I now began to perceive the reason of the great eagerness which was shown to obtain the emperor's sanction to what had taken place, because without his sanction this revolution could not be consolidated. There was more anxiety to obtain his recognition than that of any other sovereign, because it was not apprehended that any of the other powers would refuse to acknowledge an order of things which might be expected to diminish the influence of France and Spain. At the same time, I ascertained that the abdication of Charles IV had not been voluntary. Indeed, had it been so, it would have been conducted with more solemnity and accompanied by all the pompous ceremonials which a people so formal as the Spaniards introduced into all public transactions of importance. Soon after I got home, I received a visit from the Duke del Infantado, president of the Council of Castile, and a particular favorite of the Prince of the Asturias. He came straight from Ferdinand and had heard the report of the canon Escouquis. Our conversation was much the same as that which passed between the canon and me. He asked me if I wished to see the king. I answered that I should be proud of such an honor, if it was the king's pleasure, that I must observe that I had no mission, and that I could only repeat what I had already stated to Signor Escouquis and himself. He told me that he was very desirous that I should hear from the lips of the king himself the expression of the sentiments of regard which he felt for France, and for the emperor in particular. To that I could have no objection, and I told him that I should await the king's orders. As he was leaving me, he turned back and asked, "How will you treat him?" "What do you mean by that question?" said I. "In addressing him, will you say 'Your Majesty'?" replied the Duke. I could not help smiling and saying to the president of the Council of Castile that talking this way was like children's play, that it mattered little whether I saluted him with the title of Majesty or Sultan, as I was not accredited to him, that nothing could be founded on any expression which I might use, and that if the king did me the honor to receive me in the character of a traveler, I would use that mode of address which might be most agreeable to him, that if anything else was required, I would decline the invitation. I did not mistake the object of the Duke del Infantado's visit. He had been one of the victims of the Prince of the Peace and had been recalled by the Prince of Asturias from his estate to which he had been exiled. He was a good Spaniard, but ill-disposed towards the French government, to which he attributed all the mortifications to which he had been exposed. I had scarcely been 48 hours at Madrid when I perceived everywhere an extreme desire to obtain the sanction of France to the revolution of Aranjuez. Had that change been fair and voluntary, this anxiety would not have existed. The Duke del Infantado came to me in the evening, and I think it was he who conducted me to King Ferdinand. Perhaps it might be another officer of the court, but of this I am certain, that the Duke del Infantado called to inform me that the king would receive me after dinner. I went to the palace and was introduced without delay into the king's closet. There were present the Canon Escoquis, the Duke of San Carlos, and Senor Ceballos. I saluted him as I had told the Duke del Infantado I would, and expressed myself as follows: Sire, the Emperor did not foresee that I should have the honor of being presented to your Majesty, and did not employ me on any mission to you. He has learned in summary manner what has passed at Aranjuez, but as he was not prepared for it, he was astonished at the event and has endeavored to discover the cause. His attachment to the king, your father, makes the emperor feel a warm interest in whatever may befall him, and at first he was afraid that the revolution which placed your Majesty on the throne, as it assumed the appearance of being directed against projects attributed to France, might be the signal of a rupture between two countries which really need the friendship of each other. In that case, the emperor is prepared. I believe, however, that it is not your Majesty's intention to make war on the emperor, but, sire, people are often carried away by the force of opinion when put in motion, and cannot recover themselves from the impulse, and it must be confessed that the least clear-sighted cannot have failed to observe a sudden revulsion here within the last fortnight. We are not yet placed on our trial, but the charge is preparing. The king and his two counselors interrupted me to observe, No, we bear no ill will to France. It was supposed that you meant to protect the Prince of the Peace, and that indisposed us against you. In fact, the question as to him does not regard you at all. I know not what we meddle with that question. I can easily understand the effect it would produce. It was remarked that the Grand Duke of Berg daily interfered in his favor. I know nothing of that, but if it be so, it is a very trifling ground of quarrel. The Prince of the Peace was naturally an object of interest with us when he was the arbiter of everything in Spain. Such was the will of the king. We had nothing to say on the subject, and it was quite natural that we should have an understanding with the favorite. But in this respect, the interest taken in him ceases with his credit. I can see only one case in which we would shield him by our protection. That would occur if Charles IV claimed him. For our ties with him are not broken, and until your Majesty be recognized, we will punctually observe our engagements with the king, your father. As he has now placed himself under the protection of our army, it will do its duty if the king should require it. I repeat to your Majesty that the Emperor looks anxiously to the course which this event may take. It will be necessary for him to know whether your Majesty's sentiments are the same as those entertained by your father, and whether our political relations are to undergo any change. The king, or more strictly speaking, the Canon Escoquis and the Duke de San Carlos, replied earnestly, Good God, no! We wish to live with the emperor on still better terms than before. I believe so, gentlemen, but facts should correspond with the assurances you give me, and you must allow that hitherto appearances are not in your favor. I shall give a faithful account of both of facts and assurances. Moreover, the emperor feels so much interest about what is passing in Spain that he has resolved to come to the frontier, and I am informed that he has already left Paris for that purpose. He will receive my courier on the road, as well as others, with dispatches addressed to him by different authorities here. There is reason to fear that many reports will not be so favorable as you seem to expect, and that the emperor may adopt some course before the final arrangement be made with Charles IV? Because the emperor knows what he must lose by his removal from the government, and he cannot be at ease on that subject until he know on what footing he is to stand with his successor. You now know the disposition of mind in which I left the emperor. Here my audience terminated, and I took my leave. Chapter 20. I had occasionally some conversations with the Grand Duke of Berg, who on his part carried on a very active correspondence with Charles IV, the Queen, and Prince of the Peace, who were at Aranjuez, and who often wrote to him several times in one day. The general who commanded the French division at Aranjuez served as a medium of communication between the parties. The letters of the royal personages and the details respecting them transmitted by the general were really of a distressing character. In a dispatch dated March 23rd, he says, "In pursuance of your Imperial Highness's orders, I repair to Aranjuez with your Highness's letter to the Queen of Etruria. It was 8 a.m, and the Queen was not up. She rose, however, immediately, and I was admitted. She requested me to wait a little until she read the letter to the King and the Queen. In about half an hour she returned the King and Queen of Spain. Her Majesty told me that she thanked your Imperial Highness for the interest you take in their misfortunes, which were the more lamentable inasmuch as they were the work of a son. The King said that the revolution had been brought about by deep contrivance, that money had been distributed, and that the principal actors of it were his son and Caballero, the Minister of Justice, that he had been compelled to abdicate to save the Queen's and his own life, that he knew they were to be assassinated during the night if he did not comply, that the conduct of the Prince of Asturias was most horrible, but that as he had perceived the ardent desire of the Prince to reign, and as he was himself fast approaching his 60th year, he had agreed to resign the crown to him on his marriage with a French princess, which the King earnestly desired to take place. The King added that the Prince of Asturias wished him to retire with the Queen to Badajoz on the frontiers of Portugal, that he had informed the Prince that the climate of Badajoz would not suit his health, and begged to be allowed to choose another place of residence, that he wished the Emperor's permission to purchase an estate in France, whither he wished to go and end his days. The Queen also told me that she had beseeched her son to delay their removal to Badajoz, but had obtained no concession from him, and that they were to set off on Monday next. At the moment when I was about to take leave of their Majesties, the King said to me, I have written to the Emperor, in whose hands I placed my destiny. I intended to send the letter by courier, but I cannot have a better opportunity of forwarding it than through you. The King then went to his closet and soon returned, holding in his hand the enclosed letter, which he delivered to me, saying, My situation is most wretched. They have taken the Prince of the Peace from me, and mean to put him to death. They can charge him with no crime, except that of having been all his life faithful to me. He added that he had resorted to every kind of solicitation to save the life of his unfortunate friend, but that a deaf ear had been turned to all his prayers, which were answered by a spirit of vengeance, and that the death of the Prince of the Peace would bring on his, for he could not survive him. Every evening the Grand Duke visited Ferdinand's sister, the Queen of Etruria, who inhabited the Palace of Madrid, along with her brother. That princess wished her father not to retire. She saw that she must lose, by that measure, much of her consideration, her hopes, and the prospects of her children, and consequently she concealed nothing from the Grand Duke that he wished to know respecting the despotism of her brother, with whom she lived. The bad intentions of Ferdinand towards France became thus perfectly well known, and the communications of the Queen of Etruria frequently formed the subject of reports transmitted to the Emperor. Seeing whence the information came, he could acquire from it no other idea respecting the events in Spain than that which had already formed. Nevertheless, he did not confide in these reports exclusively, and they therefore increased his impatience to ascertain the precise truth. The desire shown by the Grand Duke of Berg for the departure of Ferdinand could not fail to displease him. I am therefore persuaded that his prompt resolution to treat on his own affairs personally was the result of an apprehension that the emperor might form a decision on information received from persons unfavorable to him, and the fear that his father, who he knew had protested against his abdication, if he reascended the throne, would again choose for his minister the Prince of the Peace, whose resentment would have placed the Prince of the Asturias in a very disagreeable situation. I do not know what passed in the council in which the journey to Bayonne was resolved on, but the observation I have made cannot fail to be among the first points taken into consideration. I called on the Duke del Infantado in return for the visit I had received from him. He informed me that the king was to commence his journey on the following day, adding that he would have gone that very day had not some previous time been required for stationing relays on the road. I asked leave to accompany the king solely for this reason. I had come from Bayonne to Madrid on horseback, which was then the usual mode of traveling in Spain. I had not been long arrived, and it was now necessary to go back, that I might be with the emperor as soon as Ferdinand. But I did not wish to travel over again the same road in the same manner. I therefore requested the king's grand equerry to include in the relays harness and draft horses for me. He consented, and this is the way in which my carriage happened to be in the suites of the king. The Duke del Infantado did not seem to like this journey. Was it because he suspected a snare was laid, or that he was afraid the emperor had been informed of certain particulars, respecting which it would be difficult to give satisfactory explanation? How this might be, I know not, but the impression still remains on my mind that he was dissatisfied. Snare there was none, and he had no reason to suspect any. But if he really thought he had grounds for suspicion, it then becomes impossible to excuse his neglect in not opposing, with all the energy of which he was capable, a journey which he believed dangerous to the king. If he had other fears, he should have asked his conscience whether they were well-founded. It was there only he could find reason to be satisfied with himself. These equivocal appearances on the part of a court, which was earnestly seeking the support of ours, were not calculated to create confidence, but on the contrary counseled a prudent foresight as to any engagements into which it might be proposed that we should enter. I informed the Grand Duke of Berg of the king's determination. I found with him, when I made the communication, Monsieur de la Forest, our last minister in Prussia. The emperor had set him to obtain farther information as to what was passing in Madrid. He doubtless had instructions for any case which could arise. Ferdinand VII took his departure at the time he had appointed, leaving his uncle Don Antonio in charge of the government. But I followed the king, who halted on the first day at Buitrago, where I had the honor of dining with him. Next day he proceeded on to Arnada del Duero, and the third day's stage brought him to Burgos. We found in that town several Spaniards of rank, among the rest Senores Valdez and Cuesta, both decided partisans of the revolution against the Prince of the Peace, and declared enemies of France. The king received them in a more distinguished manner than any other persons, and gave them particular marks of his favor. We had at Burgos a small corps commanded by Marshal Pessier, Duke d'Istria. The marshal was naturally an acute observer, and though it was no part of our duty to confer on what was going forward, he did not conceal from me his opinion that the state of things around him was far from satisfactory. I left the king in a transport of joy at receiving for the first time public honors from the people, and did not go to his residence till the evening to inquire at what hour he intended to leave Burgos on the following day. When I was informed, I returned to converse with Marshal Pessier, and to prepare him for paying due respect to the king at the moment of his departure, which he did by ordering his troops under arms and firing salutes of artillery. The king arrived at Vitoria, where he was received with the same demonstrations as at Burgos, and where the civil and military authorities of the provinces of Biscay and Alava were assembled. We had also Vitoria, a division under the command of General Verdier. In the evening, I repaired to the king's quarters, as I had done at Burgos, to fix the hour of the departure, which I supposed would take place the next day. The king did not receive me and sent Senor Cevallos to inform me that he was fatigued. On this occasion ensued the conversation which is mentioned by Senor Cevallos in his Memorial, where it is related in an extraordinary way for a man of sense accustomed to business. The Memorial is written in the style of a man who is more anxious to justify himself in the eyes of a violent party with whom he felt it a matter of importance to be reconciled, rather than in the style of an impartial man who had nothing to fear from a disclosure of the truth. The following is a correct statement of what took place. The king's apartments were very limited, excepting the room which opened into his bedchamber. There was no other in which we could converse. Senor Cevallos conducted me into the room in which the Canon Escoquis was in bed. He was ill, but he nevertheless took part in our conversation, at which were also present the Duke del Infantado and San Carlos. Senor Cevallos spoke first, and said in rather an unpolite tone, "Sir, the king will go no further." It was not even his intention to come thus far. However, his majesty will stay here for the emperor if he's coming, but he has not yet arrived at Bayonne, and it is not proper that the king of Spain should go and wait for him, but the emperor must at least inform him of his arrival. Senor Cevallos spoke French badly, and as I could not speak Spanish, the Duke del Infantado was often obliged to answer for Senor Cevallos. "Sir," I replied, "the king has a right to remain where he pleases, as he had also a right to depart. That resolution was adopted in his council, where doubtless that which you now communicate to me has also been adopted. I have, however, to regret that this resolution has been changed, because from the information I received at Madrid respecting the king's intention of going to meet the emperor, I announced the circumstance, informing the emperor of his majesty's departure, and sending him the itinerary of his route. I shall appear like a man who has either obtained no information or who has been duped, and at all events this change of determination on the part of the king's council must necessarily give rise to many conjectures. Now that I am conversing on this part of your affairs, which my mission does not authorize me to touch upon, as I informed the king when I had the honor to be presented to him, can you inform me of the reasons which have occasioned the king's journey to be suspended?" "We have not suspended it," said Senor Cevallos. "The king was not to go even to Burgos, and yet he has come thus far." "Sir," replied I am not to be deceived. The king set out from Madrid with the intention of going to see the emperor, and you cannot deny that the relays are even now in readiness on the road between this and Bayonne. Do you suppose I am not aware of this? There is a reason for this change. You may or may not explain the reason according as you think fit, but if you endeavor to deceive me by pretending that it is merely a question of etiquette, I may believe you or not as I please, and I am not to be duped. I have not urged your departure, and I began by telling you that I was not accredited to your master in any official character. Since you wish to maintain such strict etiquette with regard to the situation of the king, we shall observe etiquette on our side, which will also give rise to difficulties. Thus the two sovereigns will go no farther than the two extremities of the bridge of Bidasoa." Cevallos: "That is as it should be, and what has taken place before." "Very well, gentlemen. We must have the length of the bridge exactly measured, so that each may take an equal number of steps. To this allow me to add that the emperor has manifested no wish for this ceremonious visit. You may go to Iran, but that will not oblige him to go to Saint-Jean-de-Luz. Do you expect him to acknowledge you King of Spain and to do you fealty and homage for Roussillon? In the emperor's eyes, sire, The throne of Spain is not vacant. Charles IV is still seated on it. He called us to his aid. He will find us ready to serve him. What is the use then of making it a matter of such importance to settle what should be done and what should not be done? The etiquette of which you are so tenacious cannot create difficulties in a question with which it has no connection. If etiquette is to be the guide of your conduct, the king perhaps should not have been permitted to leave Madrid under such circumstances. If, as is more probable, you have had other reasons for inducing the king to come to this determination, it is for you to judge whether you have done enough in bringing him here, and to reflect on consequence of a reserve from which we may draw what inference we please, since you decline giving any explanation. The Canon Escoquisse, who was in bed, observed that it was useless to conceal from me the uneasiness which was felt, that it was understood on all sides that the emperor was unfavorably disposed towards the king, and that he would not acknowledge him. How unfortunate would be, he added, if I and these gentlemen who wish to serve him should be the cause of his ruin. This idea, he said, had occurred to them, and he could not disguise the grief it occasioned. To this, said I have no reply to make. I have received no communication since my departure from Paris, and I am not authorized to give the emperor's instructions any other interpretation than that which is warranted by the sentiments he expressed on sending me to Spain. I then observed nothing that seemed to augur what you apprehend, but if, since then, the king has received any intimation, as I am ignorant of its nature, I cannot judge of it. You did not express this apprehension on quitting Madrid. It has come upon you since. Take care that you do not draw down upon yourselves the evil which you dread. I cannot cure you of fear. It is for you to ascertain whether it's founded. Ceballos, but we do not want the emperor's assistance. We can arrange matters very well without it. We want to have nothing to do with him. That is a bad answer, sir. People cannot do exactly as they please in this world, and if the emperor chooses to have anything to do with you, you must, whether you like it or not, have to do with him. Ceballos, but can you be answerable for the emperor's acknowledging the king? I know nothing about it. I have no authority either to affirm or to contradict. Whatever I may say on this subject is nothing to the purpose, as I do not know the emperor's determination, but I believe on my conscience that he wishes above all things to avoid going to war with Spain. When speaking to me about it, he said he should regard it as a sacrilegious war. But I am persuaded that his determination will be formed from what he learns, and that he will judge by what he sees. All this depends on you. Examine your conscience and see whether your intentions correspond with the emperor's wishes. Above all, do not attempt to deceive him. You know that is no easy matter. Ceballos, the king entertains the best intentions towards France, but he will not depend on her. France has already interfered too much in our affairs. There must be an end of it. This may be understood in various ways. Do you wish to give us a dismissal or to take one for yourselves? Without being authorized, I will take upon me to accede to either the one or the other, and I will leave you, gentlemen, to answer for the consequences. Ceballos, but I do not see why the emperor wishes to interfere in our affairs. Have we broken our alliance in any way? The emperor interferes in your affairs because they have become the affairs of Spain, and the affairs of Spain are connected with his. It matters not to him who reigns in Spain if his relations with the country remain uninjured. Finally, sir, you either propose to resist him, in which case he will form his determination, or you intend to satisfy him. And if so, you cannot hesitate to give him a proof of your intention, since you, Senor Ceballos, in particular, know better than any of these gentlemen what the emperor wishes. Having been attached to the Prince of the Peace, you know all our most intimate relations with your country. I do not understand the objections you urge, and I cannot but infer that they conceal some bad design. Do you intend to go to war? We shall soon be ready for you. Do you suspect us of bad intentions towards the king? It would be rather too late to talk of being afraid, for in that case, how would how would you justify yourselves for having brought the king hither in the midst of our troops? Is he not under our guard and at our disposal? We have one division of infantry here, one at Briverca and one at Burgos. If you commence hostilities, tell me in what direction you would retire. Do you intend to continue towards us the same line of policy which Spain maintained under the father of King Ferdinand? If so, whence all your alarms, which are only calculated to excite apprehensions in us, if the king be disposed to satisfy the emperor? Why should he fear to meet him in any place whatever, and to come to a frank explanation with him respecting the circumstances which led to his accession, as well as the events that may ensue from it? It appears to me that this conduct would be consistent with the sentiments which induced the Prince of the Asturias to appeal to the emperor to intercede between him and his offended father. This is a recent affair. Among all the fancies with which you have been tormenting yourselves, did it never occur to you that the first reception of the emperor might be somewhat cold? He has the seniority in age and in right, but the rules of etiquette being observed and the national interests arranged in a way suitable to our old alliance, why should he not be ready to acknowledge King Ferdinand? Show me the impossibility of this. It depends more on you than on the emperor. I am now going to rejoin him. I shall tell him all that is to be feared, as well as all that is to be hoped, and I doubt not that he will send me back again in 2 or 3 days. I quitted these gentlemen to prepare for my journey to Bayonne. Chapter 21. I had brought with me from Paris the eldest son of Monsieur Hervas. We had occasion to go to Madrid, and his company was very advantageous to me, as I did not understand a word of Spanish. He also accompanied me on my return to Bayonne. While the postilions were preparing my carriage and seeking the mules, which is by no means the business of a moment in Spain, I asked Monsieur Hervas to call on Senor Severus in my name and tell him that I was quite at a loss to understand the opposition I had experienced on his part, which was the more extraordinary on being made by him, from whom, had there been anything obscure or equivocal in my mission, I had little reason to expect obstruction, because ever since he had been in office in Spain, he had openly professed himself devoted to the interests of France, that he had been very recently employed by the Prince of the Peace in the arrangements lately concluded at Fontainebleau between France and Spain, that he could not persuade himself that the faction which had overthrown the Prince of the Peace was ignorant of the confidence that prince had reposed in him, or that when he arrived served the purpose of that faction, he would escape the resentment directed against everyone connected with the fallen minister whose sister he had married, that finally, at all events, he was exposing himself to the just resentment of France for counteracting the plans which he had long assisted in promoting. Monsieur Hervas waited on Severus and delivered my message. It will shortly be seen that the opinion of the latter was altogether different from that which he expressed on this occasion. I set out for Bayonne, where I arrived some hours before the emperor, who was expected from Bordeaux. Monsieur de Champigny, who was then Minister for Foreign Affairs, had arrived, and I explained to him at great length the embarrassments which I foresaw must be experienced before harmony could be established between us and Spain. I told him that I should disguise nothing from the emperor in giving him the details of my mission, and that, without in any way prejudicing the course which he might adopt to reestablish himself in Spain on the same footing in which he stood before the Revolution, in which he had been obliged to interfere, I should call his attention to the opposition he will everywhere encounter, that plans had presumptuously been attributed to him and openly talked of at the Grand Duke of Berk's, that I knew not how to credit these alleged projects, as it did not appear to me that the emperor had formed any resolution, that I knew not whether he had since changed his opinion, but that it was necessary to distrust the impression which the Grand Duke of Berg could not fail to endeavor to give him, both with respect to individuals and the disposition of the country, and that he had already caused a marked alteration of the sentiments manifested by the Spaniards for France, and the emperor, before he had any command in the country. I added that this Spanish Revolution might lead the emperor much farther than was anticipated, and that I was convinced the state of the country had been falsely viewed through the medium of the intrigues by which it was governed under our protection, but that now, when the idol, the Prince of the Peace, was cast down, we should see the Spanish people act a part which others might be induced to imitate. The emperor arrived that evening and had a long interview with Monsieur de Champigny, who reported my conversation to him. I was soon sent for. The emperor had as yet received from Spain only the daily reports from the Grand Duke of Berg, in whose knowledge he had been much less confidence than in his courage at a moment of danger. He had also received all the letters which Charles IV and the Queen had written to the Grand Duke. All this correspondence occupied his mind, but did not throw sufficient light on the question. He made me stop a great part of the night and relate to him all that I had seen and done. He was disappointed at the information I gave him, and particularly displeased at the projects attributed to him. I observed that these reports were the consequence of what was passing around the Grand Duke of Berg, adding that if he did not act according to instructions, it would be necessary to adopt precautions to prevent much embarrassment which might occur. The emperor said, "But tell me, what sort of a man is the Prince of the Asturias? Does he govern, or is he governed? In what manner can I arrange matters with him, or must I renounce the expectation of doing so? I am not inclined to the latter alternative, because, as you say, it would lead to war." I answered, "Sire, I have had abundant assurances of the best intentions. As to promises, I've had pockets full, both from the prince and his ministers. But as to warranting their sincerity, that I beg to be excused from doing." And I related to him all that had passed, and I have already stated it. There's no doubt, I added, that the Aranjuez Revolution was contrary to the will of Charles IV, and consequently that his abdication was compulsory. This would be evident enough were there no other proof than the anxiety of Charles IV to put himself under the protection of our troops, who in fact guard him in the palace of Aranjuez, and on the other hand, the equal anxiety with which the Prince of the Asturias testifies to obtain your Majesty's sanction to the event which has placed him on the throne, because that being procured, he will have no difficulty in obtaining the assent of the other powers of Europe. I do not think that you will succeed in placing yourself in the same footing in Spain with Prince Ferdinand as that on which you stood with his father, notwithstanding that he promises it. To do so does not depend on him, for it is the hope held out to his adherents of throwing off the yoke of France, which has rendered public opinion favorable to him, and made him at the present moment so popular that to oppose him would be to oppose the nation, which would be entirely against us on this point. He manifests the best disposition towards your Majesty, but he is distracted by being repeatedly told that you will not recognize him, and that when once he enters Bayonne, he will never be allowed to go back again. There is difficulty in making him believe this, but nevertheless, it makes some impression on his mind, and appears to have made him adopt the resolution of stopping at Vittoria. As to governing by himself, that he can never do. He has received a palace education, and has not the slightest idea of what the business of government is. His ministers will do everything while he reigns, and those ministers appear to me to entertain principles which will render them unfavorable to us. The emperor replied, "This business looks bad, but how has he learned that I will not recognize him? That will depend on himself. If not, I will replace his father on the throne." Matters went on so well with the father before I heard of the projects of this Prince of the Asturias that I used to pray that he might live 100 years. But if I must ultimately be embroiled with the son, I shall not begin by doing which he has so anxiously desired. I certainly like better to see one of my friends than one of my enemies on the throne of Spain, whence comes this dread which he has conceived of me.